Hello, this is Roger Martin from here in Springville, visiting with my wife's family. Um, Anyhow, we'll talk about power and love and the combination of the two. And with this man here, Adam uh, Kahane, I think. Anyhow, here goes.
Helping teams of leaders, leaders of government, of business, of civil society, work together to solve their toughest social, political, and economic problems.
Here, this sign up here is power and this is love, and it's a combination of both power and love, helping people get there.
Was being able to work with power. But I discovered I was wrong.
So he discovered that he's wrong with both using love to solve problems wasn't enough, power to solve problems wasn't enough. You actually had to learn to do both.
Then I thought that the key to being able to solve tough problems was being able to work with love. But it turns out I was wrong again. And what I have learned is that the only way to solve tough problems is to be able to work with both power and love.
So we're going to go on here. He quotes from this man here.
What I mean by power, the way I'm using this word in a very particular way, I'm using the definition of power given by the theologian Paul Tillich. Tillich said, "Power is the drive of everything living to realize itself with increasing intensity and extensity."
Well, that's a powerful definition. What does he mean by that? He'll let us know.
And my own experience in business, in politics, in daily life was that this drive of everything living to realize itself was a creative force that made things happen. But as the Vision Guatemala conversations unfolded, here a dialogue about the most difficult aspects of the war between a former military.
So here, talking about Guatemala, and they had this civil war for 35 years. What a mess. And here's the problem.
A generative creative side, but also had a degenerative destructive side. And if people are trying to realize themselves, do what they want, get what they want, but in a way that doesn't pay attention to or ignores the self-realization of others, the result is brutal and, in the Guatemalan case, genocidal. So
the terrible destructive side of this genocide, he gives an example here with a priest and
is that at the bottom of the grave there were small bones. And he asked the forensics people, what happened here? Did people have their bones broken during the massacre? And they said, no, sir. This massacre involved a number of pregnant women, and what you are seeing are the bones of their fetuses.
So what did they do with this horrific situation in this picture? This was a turning point for the country and the culture and the reknitting of the culture.
Imagine it in a circle of 30 people, all of whom in one way or another have been involved in the events under discussion. The group was completely silent, and then we went on with our work. And over the years that followed, this Vision Guatemala team went on to do many things in Guatemala to rebuild and reknit the country. When a group of researchers from MIT interviewed members of the Vision Guatemala team about their experience, many of them pointed to this 5 minutes of silence as having been the moment where they really understood what they needed to do as a group, as a team, and that gave them the purposefulness to do what they went on to do over the years that followed. And one of them used a very particular word. He said, these 5 minutes were a period of communion. Now, to say something is a period of communion in a Catholic country doesn't mean a nice moment or a friendly moment. It means a moment of being one body. And I thought now I had it, that this was really the essence of solving tough problems, this this recognition of being one body, the recognition of interconnection, of wholeness. And this corresponds to what Paul Tillich, the definition Paul Tillich gave of love. He said, love is the drive to unify the separated. Not to create unity, but to reveal the unity which is there. So now I thought I had it. That this really was it. 10 years later, I went back to Guatemala in 2008. I wanted to see my friends. We had a reunion of the team. Some things had gone very well in Guatemala. Some things had gone badly. The team was still very connected. And at the meeting, or on that trip, I had lunch with a woman I admire very much, Clara Arenas, who is a leader of an important NGO movement in Guatemala. And when we sat down for lunch, she said, Adam, I know you were so taken by the dialogue, by the oneness, by the communion in Vision Guatemala. Do you know that last week my NGO movement took out a full-page advertisement in the Guatemala City newspaper saying we would no longer participate in any more dialogues? And of course, she knew I'd be interested. I said, why did you do that? And she said, well, our experience is that when we entered into dialogue with the government or with the big business, they expected that when we were participating in the dialogue, we would stop marching in the streets. We would demobilize. And our view was that if being in dialogue meant that we had to give up the little bit of power we had as a civil society movement, that is simply an unacceptable deal. So that's when I realized that love also has two sides. And it's at that point that I started to understand the mathematics of power and love. And it's really quite simple. What is it that makes power degenerative rather than generative? It is the absence of love. And what is it that makes love degenerative rather than generative? It is the absence of power. So power and love are not a choice. They are a dilemma or a polarity. And choosing either power or love is always a mistake. The person who put this most clearly is Paul Tillich's, or was Paul Tillich's most famous student, Martin Luther King Jr., who said, power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. This clash between immoral power and powerless immorality is the central crisis of our time.
Wow, did you hear that statement? A very powerful statement. I'll have to think about that and go back and review that, but it is something worth thinking about, to say the least.
So I first saw this in the extraordinary context of post-war Guatemala, but now I realize that the same phenomena plays out in all social scales: global, national, organizational, community, family. And if you want to see this most clearly, you just have to look at the historically constructed roles in the family. This was pointed out to me by a great feminist scholar from Milan, Paola Melchiori, who said to me that you can see the two sides of power and the two sides of love in such a family.
Now, isn't this interesting, the two sides of power and the two sides of love?
The husband represents power, and the generative side of his power is that he goes out of the house in the morning to do his job, to make his contribution to the world, to create something in the world. The degenerative side of his power, which is the subject of 100 novels and 100 movies, is that he becomes so concerned with this thing he has to do, with his work, with his destiny, with his ambition, that he becomes a robot or a tyrant. But what I hadn't appreciated until Paola pointed it out to me is it's symmetrically true of the wife. The generative side of the wife's love is that she literally gives birth to the children, metaphorically to the family. The degenerative side of her love is that she becomes so concerned with with protecting, with guaranteeing the unity of the family, that she undermines the power of the members of the family and, even more fundamentally, undermines her own power. So we can see in an everyday situation the two sides of power and the two sides of love. The great biography of Martin Luther King is named Taylor Branch, and when he was discussing this speech where King said, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic," he said that King's life can be understood as walking a narrow path, trying to avoid, on the one hand, reckless and abusive power without love, and on the other hand, sentimental and anemic love without power. And there is, of course, a famous story about such a narrow path, the story of Odysseus trying to sail through the Strait of Messina between these two monsters. On the rocks is Scylla, this seven-headed monster, and in the middle of the passage is Charybdis, this whirlpool. And the difficulty of sailing this narrow path is if he tries to avoid Charybdis, he risks falling into Scylla, and if he tries to avoid Scylla, he risks being devoured by Charybdis. And this is how I understand what is involved in trying to walk this narrow path. That if you find yourself in a situation or yourself exhibiting reckless and abusive power without love, what's needed is to reinforce the love side. And when you find yourself falling into a sentimental and anemic love without power, what's needed is to reinforce the power side. So, this is what I have learned. Working with both power and love is simple, but it's not easy. Working with power and love requires each of us to stretch beyond our comfort zone, and in particular, for the people who are most comfortable and confident with power, to work on strengthening their capacity for love, and for the people who are most comfortable and capable in love, to work on strengthening their capacity for power. And it is only when we can work with both power and love that we can solve our tough problems.
Okay, that's a great ending. We'll edit this and go from there. Again, this is Roger Martin, normally from Billings, Montana, today here in Springville, Utah. Catch you later, and good day. Oh, may we learn to balance this love and this power in an enabling way, in an uplifting and enabling way. When we do it right, it is enabling and uplifting and creative. And when we do it wrong, it is destructive. So that's the clue. If we do it right, it's enabling, uplifting, and emboldening. When we do it wrong, it's regressive and destructive. And I say these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.